After our Kilcairn tour, we had a 5-minute break in the washback bar. Excellent place to go. And then it's off to the races for our next tour of the Springbank Distillery, the home here to Hazelburn, Long Row, as well as Springbank. Nicole, once again, was our tour guide, and she did a fabulous job. Thank you very much, Nicole.
This is Scotland's oldest independently owned distillery. Established in 1828, Springbank was founded by a man called Archibald Mitchell, who founded the distillery on the site of his previously illicit still. So although whisky was kind of legitimised in the earlier 1800s, I think they'd been making whisky illegally for decades and centuries before that. The Mitchell family themselves originally came from the lowlands of Scotland and relocated to the Kintyre area in the 1600s, so they'd been here for quite a while. As we've talked about earlier, there were a lot of distilleries in Campbelltown, and when we're standing here, to this side, this building here, is our bottling hall. If you listen, you can hear them bottling away. And behind that is the spire of the Lorne and Lowland Church, which we saw through the window, the Glengyle logo. This bottling hall, where our bottling hall is now, this building was once a warehouse for the now extinct Long Row Distillery. Mm-hmm. And it said that the man who owned the Long Row Distillery paid, of the £1,100 needed to build this church spire, he paid £1,000. So paid for most of it. And it was said that there were almost as many churches in Campbelltown as distilleries, because all the distillery owners would pay for churches to be built in penance for making the devil's drink. So that was the part of the Long Row Distillery, which would have been in this area here. Hello there. Hiya. Nowadays at Springbank we make 3 different brands of whisky. The Long Row Distillery, which is obviously named after, or the Long Row Spirit or whisky that's named after this extinct distillery. Hazelburn whisky, single malt whisky, is named after another of Campbelltown's lost distilleries, which you can still see. As you drive out of town this way, you'll pass the petrol station on the right hand side, and just next to that there's a building which is Hazelburn Industrial Estate now. There's an archway. That was Hazelburn Distillery. And interestingly, that's where Masataka Taketsuru spent the majority of his time learning how to make whisky while in Scotland. He spent most of it at Hazelburn. That was about 102 years ago now. We had the centenary anniversary of that a couple of years ago, his time in Campbelltown. So 3 very different styles or brands of whisky made in the same distillery. Hazelburn, triple distilled, unpeated, makes up about 10% of our annual production. We tend to make it at the beginning of the year in January, when everything's had 3 months of maintenance and cleaning, and start fresh with Hazelburn non-peated. Then we tend to make Long Row in February. It also accounts for 10% of our annual production, is more heavily peated and double distilled. And then the Springbank original recipe is 2.5 times distilled. We'll talk about that when we go into the still house. And nice and lightly peated, like the Kilcairn that you've just tried, about 10 to 12 ppm. So when we're moving around, we just stay within these yellow lines wherever they are, and we'll try and have a wee quick look in places that we maybe don't ordinarily go on distillery tours as well. So we come this way. See the top of the kiln. So on a Monday and a Wednesday, you see the smoke billowing out here, but not today. And then this building at the end is where all of the malt barns, or is the malt barn. So we've got 3 floors. The top floor is no longer used. It's where we store our local barley once it's harvested, until it's being distilled with, or malted and distilled with. And then on the second floor we can malt up to 11 tonnes of barley, and on the ground floor up to 13 tonnes of barley. These malt barns are operational 50 or so weeks of the year. Mm-hmm. So come on in. So I'll tell you briefly what's happening in here, and then we can maybe go and have a quick look upstairs and see where the steeping happens, and there might be some action going on up there as well. But I know that most of you know the process fairly well, so I'll just tell you about the distillery and what we do and what we're using. This particular variety of barley that we're using at the moment is Sassy barley. We get our barley from Highland Grain Limited, which are based in Inverness, and that barley will predominantly be grown in Cromarty, which is in the Inverness area as well, so in the north of Scotland. Springbank, I believe, is the only distillery in Scotland that does 100% of the process in-house. So every grain of barley that's used to make Longrow, Hazelburn, Springbank whiskies is malted on one of our 2 malting floors. So the barley that we have here is maybe about 2 or 3 days into the process of germination. But it would have started its journey on the 2nd floor where it would have been steeped. So when it's delivered in, it comes into 2 big silos outside this room, each hold about 30 tonnes of grain. And then it comes into the steeping tank upstairs, water's added from that Cross Hill lock that we've talked about, and soaked into the grain over the first, I think it's up to 38 hours. There's a 12-hour soaking period, 12 hours of aeration, followed by 14 hours of soaking once again, before it's then hand shovelled out of the steep tank upstairs and laid on the floor. If it's coming down to this floor, they open some hatches in the bottom of the steeping tank and it comes into 3 big piles in this corner, and then they'll spread it out as you see it now. In here, we turn the barley every 4 hours, and we alternate between turning by hand using the metal grubber here and the electric turner, which is over here. So you can tell what's most recently been used. When you turn by hand, the barley lays in puddles like this, as a field. Whereas if you use the electric turner, which I think they're doing upstairs right now, you'll see that it really throws the barley out and it's like a smooth pattern. So alternate every 4 hours. We also do local barley. So every year we contract a local farmer to grow barley on our behalf. We get normally about 20 tonnes each year. It's a spring barley, so it's just recently been sown and will be harvested, depending on the variety, in August or September this year. The farm that we're currently growing on is called High Rannikin, and it's just about a mile out of town on the right-hand side as you leave. It's an organic farm as well. We don't really talk about that much, but it's a farmer who keeps everything very natural, so there's no pesticides or anything used on the barley crop at that farm. So when that's harvested, it's dried at the farm and the farmer brings it in, and we use the old sort of bucket systems and conveyor belts and whatnot in the very top floor, and it's taken into the loft where it just lies in a big pile for well, recently maybe 6 to 8 months or so before we then malt with it, and we keep it separate. We don't mix it with any of the Sassy barley. The process of germination starts with steeping. That kick-starts the process. We get all the hormones being produced, which will then kick-start germination. Here on the floor, when it's lying, it's germinating, and during this time, enzymes are working really hard to break down the cell walls within, expose molecules of starch, which would then later be broken down to sugars, which we can extract. So in the distilleries, we're basically mimicking springtime, if you like, and to be able to extract the highest amount of sugar that we can from this barley. That's the aim. So if we allowed this to lie here for longer than the 6 days that we allow it, the grain would start to, or the enzymes would start to break down the starches to sugars and use the sugars to grow further. But we are controlling this so that we can stop the germination process by drying in the kiln, preserving the enzymes to later kickstart the process again and extract the sugars when we need them in mashing. Does anyone have any questions just now? You're all good. That's great. So when you're ready, you can take photos if you want. We're going to head just up the stairs. Gold for Springbank 21, green for the 15, and it goes on. Yeah. Something else that's making a noise. So if you just walk along the side here next to the wall, we'll go up and have a wee look at the seat. Yeah, of course, yeah. So this is the old steep tank. Right now they're just preparing to steep the barley. So yesterday when I was in here they were filling it up. There was just 3 big piles of grain in the middle, but now they've spread it out nice and smoothly and even. And soon they'll add water from Crosshill Loch. The water tends to fill up about 4 to 6 inches above the barley to allow for it as it swells. And then the steeping process will begin. If they're malting or germinating on this top floor, when it comes to the time to take it out, they have to get in and they literally shovel it all by hand out here. Okay. So this is what your friend would have been doing in the whisky school. At the moment, lots of people are here to do the whisky school and they've actually, would you believe it, paid us to come here and do a lot of the work. So they shovel out here and then lay it on the floor by wheelbarrow. If it's going to the bottom floor, they'll open up the hatches inside and it'll start to go down to the floor below. And there was, as I said, local barley above us, but it's just recently been malted, so the loft's empty now.
That's cool.
Here we go, so we've got Daniel and David here, stoking the fire for starting again on Sunday night. And you're making Longbow just now, is that right?
No,
Springbank, on to Springbank. So they're doing Springbank malt at the moment. So here you can see the peat's piled up. We've got dry peat there from St Fergus Moss and Peterhead, or near Peterhead. And then we've got the dross, or the wet peat, called Bog Bain Farm, just outside Inverness. There's no romantic reason as to why we get 2 different sources of peat. We were offered a free load of the wet stuff from the farmer, and we wouldn't say no to that, so we just keep buying from him as well now. The St Fergus moss is a more commercial peat moss, so lots of people use from there. So you can see actually in action right now, they've got a bit of newspaper all tied up nice and neatly there, bit of wood, and then the dry peat will go on. When the barley's carried over from, you're welcome to come in a bit if you want. So the barley's carried along from the malting floor via a series of bucket lift systems and conveyor belts, and it'll end up in the kiln floor, which is above us here. And then once the fire's lit, if it's been lit, because we wouldn't light the fire for making Hazel burn, obviously, it's not heated, so we just turn on the air dryer for a 30-hour period to dry the Hazel burn malt. When making Springbank like we are just now, this fire will burn for the first 6 hours, and during that time, once it's established, they'll add on the nice wet peat there, keep the temperatures nice and sort of consistent and not too hot. Because we want to continuously monitor the temperatures during kilning to ensure that it doesn't get too hot and destroy any crucial enzymes that are needed for mashing. So it tends to be between 45 and 65 degrees, it says there. Once the 6 hours has passed, we then allow the fire to go out and the air dryer will complete the drying process for Springbank. So you get a nice lightly peated malt, about 10 to 12 ppm. To make long row, I've heard from everybody that's the most difficult or more labour intensive to make.
It's my favourite. Every 5 minutes, butter, dry peat every 5 minutes for 30 hours.
Constantly putting the peat on, because to get the high phenols throughout the whole 48-hour period of drying, it's barrel loads after barrel loads of peat. So yeah, that's
Is it dry or is it then the wet peat?
12 hours wet. And then the rest dry.
And when the front here is dry and the back here is wet?
So you mix, there's a mix.
Okay.
So it's 12 hours wet.
yeah.
Excellent.
We can store it for long periods in the malt bins at the back. It's a case of getting up there again with the shovels, and it's taken along to one of 10 malt silos over here. Each one holds about 20 tons of barley. Here we are. Thanks very much.
Cool.
And if you look up, you'll see the light just shining through the base of the kiln floor. So you can see, and also this is where the air circulated, so computer.
Yeah.
This is how we keep a tab of what type of malt.
And it works.
Yeah. Simple. So from here, the grain would then be taken to be milled. That's the next stage. So inside these channels, we've got Archimedes screws or conveyor belts. I've not had a look inside, I'm not sure which it is, but I think it might be screws. So the base can be opened, all the barley funnels down. In here, it's carried along, drops down, and is carried along that way. And then another lift system will carry it up 2 floors to begin the process of milling. Foreign metal fragments from the grain, so that doesn't go into our mill. On the second floor, we've got that coupe system again, and then down on the bottom floor, which we're just about to pass, is where the rollers are, and the barley's ground down to grist. The same as every distillery that I've ever visited, 20% husk, 70% middles, 10% flour is the composition we're looking for our grist. So this is the open top plough and rake mash tun. It's Victorian, it's about 100 years old. And in this pipe here is where the grist from above is held in a tank above us here, like a silo again. The grist funnels down, and in this pipe here it's mixed with the water and comes in. So this one's a bit different how it operates in comparison to Glengyle. About 3.5 tons of barley comes into any one mash here. Once it's filled, it comes right up to here with water. It's kind of overflowing. They've got a wee, look at this old like badminton bat where they go around and like push it in. They do. And it's like tiny. Just so that it doesn't spill over the edge. And then they turn on the rake for 2 revolutions, and then they let it settle. And we have 4 waters in this mash tun because it's less easy to clean. So the first water, when it's drained via this underback, goes to the washback. The second water, hotter, enters, again 2 revolutions, is drained after half an hour and comes to the same washback. And then we have a third water, which, when drained, is kept for the first water in the next mash. And then a 4th water, so there's 4 waters here, which is more unusual. And that 4th water, when it comes in, we turn on the plough and rake continuously and mash it all down to a slurry, and then that can be pumped up to the drainer, which is outside, it's quite high. And then there, any residual water is taken away to be used in part as the second water, and all the draff will be taken away by the farmer to feed the cows. So you can see actually, obviously then at Springbank using the soap, and there are no blades. No blades. So they use this, and that stops the foam. So in here we've got 6 washbacks. This one here is brand new, made from Douglas fir, but the rest of them are large, goat skin large. Each one will hold about 21,000 litres. It's the same as Glengyle. 75 kilos of yeast going in, and the fermentation time's about 100 to 110 hours. The one that this replaced had been in use for about 40 years, until just this March it was taken out and this new one's gone in. So in the end, at Springbank we get quite a low strength wash. It's about 4 to 4.5% normally. And that's, I think, because we use so much water during the mashing process for that mash tun, so it's a more diluted solution. But high in all these lovely esters and getting all those lovely fruity, sweet characteristics, just as it always has been at Springbank. So, as I said, it's not about efficiency and sort of profit and yield and everything here. It's very much about quality, tradition, and just doing what's always been done. So at the end of this time we've got our wash, which comes along to one of these tanks here to then feed into the wash still, which is the big riveted one on the left hand side. See, there's 3 big tanks. One's our spirit receiver tank for the new make, the heart, the low wines tank's in the middle, and over here is the faints tank, just below the spirit safe.
Okay.
So here, actually, quite unusually at Springbank, from the beginning, there have been 3 stills, which is fairly unusual because in Scotch whisky distilleries you tend to find pairs of stills, not 3. I don't know why. The only thing I can think is maybe back then, with so many distilleries kind of opening and the industry booming and growing, is maybe they thought something different, a point of difference, and maybe our spirit might be better if we triple or partially triple distill. I don't know the reason why, but there's always been 3 stills at Springbank. They would have all been direct fired at one stage. That seems to be a thing of the past, but here at Springbank we still have one. Our wash still is both heated by steam and a direct heat source. So when this one's going, the flame's normally burning in here. Not by coal anymore, as it probably once was, but it's still steaming, so they've just finished something, or cleaning it maybe. So this one here is the oldest of the stills. The other 2 have been more recently replaced, but we think, as again, records are not great, so we think this one was installed about the 1940s, and it's riveted, as you can see, in comparison to these, which are welded together. This one as well, because it has the direct heat source, has a rummager inside, so to avoid the yeast residue particularly, which settles on the bottom from sticking or baking to the base with the direct heat source, there's a rummager, so it's a piece of, an arm if you like, with a piece of chainmail on the end, which constantly turns throughout the process of it distilling and keeps the base nice and clean. So in here, about 10,500 litres of wash, about 4% strength come in. The spirit is distilled, all the vapours travel up, outside via the line arm to a tube and shell condenser is attached to this one. And that spirit then trickles down along and through the first window in our spirit safe, through the first spout, down to the low wines tank in the middle. Our low wines are about 20 to 25% strength. Then, to make Springbank, I'm just describing, you can see on the wall here we've got 3 different distillation methods. Hazel burn is fully triple distilled, Long Row is a regular, like Glengyle, 2 times distilled whisky, and then Springbank, which I'm describing now, is it's not really 5, but we call it 2.5 distilled. So to make Springbank, we take low wines from the low wines tank, fill it into our first low wine still, and distill that again. So again, all our lovely vapours are travelling up, along, and out to a worm tub condenser at the back. So in this distillation, it's a worm tub condenser. And that spirit trickles down through our spirit safe, and all of that liquid, the faints, will be collected in the faints tank. Then, in our final distillation, we take a mixture of low wines and faints and combine them and distill. So we take 80% from our faints tank, 20% from the low wines tank, and then it comes into this second low wine still here. And it's in this distillation that we separate our heads from our heart and our tails. So for the first while, we're collecting the foreshots or the heads, high in strength. I believe it's above 76%. So the cut points for Springbank are between 76 and 60 for our new make. So everything above 76% will go over in the heads and down to the faints tank. Then we move our spouts, start collecting the heart, which will be funneled down into the independent spirit receiver tank, the good stuff, the tasty stuff, the stuff that doesn't contain methanol and is 76 right down to about 60% strength. The guys will be taking samples from time to time. They also know from experience and timing and things like that roughly how long it's going to take, and they'll be taking samples and writing in their wee book, their log book, all the time when they make cuts. So about 60% strength. Then they move the spout back, start to collect the tails, which are 60% and below, right down to about 1% alcohol. That will make its way into the faints tank as well. So in the end, with Springbank we have a new make spirit that's It's about 71, 72% strength. Lovely, clear, consistent spirit. Our new make is then, at the end of the week, it's continuously put into a big tank through in our filling store. And then, as I said, on Friday today, they'll be filling. They might well be doing it right now, actually. So we might see them doing it. Filling the new make into casks and then taking them to one of the warehouses on site. So the two places that the whole production process varies in order to make these three different brands is only in the distillation stage and in the kilning stage, depending on the level of heating we're looking for each. Back to the mashing process, when we talked about mashing down all the grist to a slurry, it's then pumped right up this way. The water's taken away, reused, and then all the draft comes down and into the cooler here, and it's taken away by the farmer to feed to the cattle on a nearby farm called Germination. Near where our barley's being grown just now, actually.
Mm-hmm.
So this is normally a hive of activity on a Friday anyway. Here is where all the new make spirits held. As we said, about 71 to 72% strength, so they add water, reducing it to 63.5. All these casks are stenciled and ready to be filled with long row, so it's obviously long row that we've been distilling most recently. The casks are weighed when they're empty, filled, weighed again when they're full, calculate how much has gone into them, and then that'll be stenciled on here before rolling them out and taking them to one of the warehouses. We don't keep them in any one particular area or meticulous order. There's long row, side by side, Kilkerran, Hazel, Springbank maturing in the warehouses, so you don't keep any one particular in one area. Suppose that's for safety reasons that more than anything as well. If you were to lose a warehouse, you wouldn't lose all of one particular batch or brand or anything like that. So this is the original Excise office. That's where the exciseman would have stayed, and actually even still today, Gavin, who's out there, would normally stand in there and be writing everything down. Bourbon casks and sherry casks, fresh sherry casks, we buy from Miguel Martin in Spain. He's in the Jerez region, but has a company basically servicing the whisky industry. They season casks for the whisky industry with sherry. Which is really what all sherry casks used in the industry are like. You don't really get bodegas giving out casks because it doesn't really work in the sherry industry that way. When casks are in bodegas, they're there to stay, unless they are damaged in some way. So here we can see mainly sherry casks. There's a few bourbon at the back there. We don't conform to any one bourbon distillery or anything like that, so you'll see Jack Daniels, Heaven Hill, lots of different types from time to time. From here, we can go a wee short walk into the warehouse, and I'll do a special dram for you. So this is warehouse number 3. This is the number 3. Yeah. So this is the one that we bring tours into because it's one of the old. It's accessible more than the rest of them as well. As we said, we've got Kilkerran there beside a Springbank. There's a Hazel behind. We've even got a Jura cask here where we were supposed to go. That's about as close as you'll get to Jura now. This time anyway. And that's because we have an independent bottling company as well within the group, Cadenheads, who are the oldest independent bottlers in Scotland. Originally from Aberdeenshire, but I believe was bought by Mr. Wright in the 70s. And now the headquarters are in Campbelltown. So that's why you find other obscure casks like that in our warehouses. These warehouses contribute hugely to the sort of characteristics and flavours that you find in your Springbank whiskies. People often describe our whiskies as quite dirty, quite farmyardy. There's a funkiness about them, an earthiness, and that's because we get all those characteristics developing in warehouses just like this one, where there's a particular type of mould that grows in the walls and feeds on the alcohol vapours, and it contributes, along with the earthen floors and the salty air, because we're right by the sea, to all the sort of unique characteristics and flavours that you find in Campbelltown whiskies. And Finlay, our director of production, always knows the kind of wee hot spots where you get that. So if he needs to add a wee bit more of that to any particular vatting, he knows where to find the cask. Okay. So, is everyone majorly into like Springbank? That's the one. Okay. So, because we've got a Hazelburn, a Longbow, and a Springbank, but I think we'll open the Springbank. So this is a 31-year-old Springbank. It's almost as old as me. So this was going to be vatted for the 30-year-old edition that we're going to be releasing sometime soon. Because it was such a good cask on its own, Finlay kept it aside and said we'll just drink that as a single cask because it's excellent.
Okay.
So it's escaped the vatting. Cool. That's a 27-year-old Longbow, 47.5, and this is a 22-year-old Hazelburn. So Hazelburn was first made 23 years ago, I think it is now. So that was in the second year of whenever making it. Yeah.
So here we have a picture of the 5 guys I'm traveling with in Springbank. I'm in the middle, as you know. We went to the gift shop of Springbank. I bought a handful of Springbank. I did not buy a handful of Kilkerran, Hazelburn, or Longrow. Sorry. Other guys in my group, they bought a bottle each of 2 or 20 cl. I bought a 70 cl from Springbank Cask Strength. So after that, we did a Cadenhead's warehouse tasting. Fabulous. 35 pounds, 6 cask strength whiskeys. Lewis was our guide. He did a fabulous job. Thank you very much, Lewis. And then after that, we went over here to Cadenhead's shop, and we could actually pick up the bottles that we wanted to buy from the tasting. So there was an unnamed Orkney, Highland Park, someone bought. There was a Glengarry, someone bought. There was a Cameron Bridge that I didn't buy. It was a little too expensive for me, but it was 31 years old. It was okay from the price, but I'm running out of space in my suitcase already, and I have another 8 days in front of me. So, problems. But it was fabulous day. Nicole did a great job once again as our tour guide. I'm very, very thankful for all the great impressions we were able to receive. Thank you.